Hello, my name's Deborah Chadwick and I'm the clinical lead for mental health in schools, and I work for the Croydon CAMS MHST. So we're the mental health support team in schools. And I'd like to introduce my colleague as well, or she can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Freya Westlake. I'm one of the education wellbeing practitioners within the mental health support team in Croydon.
So we wanted today to just talk to you about how you support yourself and your child or your family during lockdown. We do understand that there's a lot of stresses at the moment, and we thought we put together some useful tips and advice for parents and carers. So I suppose you don't need me to tell you just how stressful the current times can be for you. You're being put under all sorts of additional pressures, both in terms of working from home, income possibly changing, having to contend with homeschooling, and trying to keep a connection to friends and family. So there's been lots of changes for you, lots of changes for your family, and also additional worries about illnesses and family becoming ill or worse. So parents also have a lot of additional expectations being put on them at the minute, and I just wanted to acknowledge how overwhelming these tasks all at once can be, and I guess that's why we've put something together for you. I think that when there's something happens which is very sudden and has a big impact, it can put us into a fight or flight mode. It's where we become more stressed and anxious and worried, and whilst we're in that way of being, it can leave us more vulnerable to additional difficulties as well, like conflict, like looking after ourselves and looking after our families. So I'll move on to the next slide just to talk about what we might think about. And we've divided the presentation up into different categories, and at the top of that is looking after yourself, and I can't really stress how important this is, really. I think that sometimes we as parents and carers, we can neglect our well-being, especially when we're having to deal with so many practical things and take care of the well-being of our families. But really, it's very important. The other thing that seems to have come into focus at the moment is managing all these relationships. Everybody's being thrown together in quite a stressful time and having to spend much more time together. And so we've included some strategies for families, and also some supportive strategies for home learning, with the additional expectation that you'll provide some opportunities for your child to learn at home. So if we can think about some of the points about looking after yourself, I think, should you feel extra anxiety at the moment, or stress or low mood, I mean, these are really normal responses. Actually, times quite strange, and it's not part of the usual order of events, and so it's quite normal to have an extreme reaction yourself to what's going on. And I think it's therefore quite important that you maintain and have some compassion for yourself, and what does that mean? That just means sort of being a bit gentler on yourself and a bit more understanding with yourself, really. You're not going to be able to do everything, and you can't provide everything for your family at this time, all at the same time. So it's quite good to sort of prioritize and put yourself in those priorities as well. Another thing we would suggest is to frame things positively. So you might want to, and we'll go into more detail later in the presentation about how we might do some positive thinking, and to if you're finding yourself thinking very negatively about things, we're also going to talk about some strategies, you know, such as limiting news, etc. And also just to try to keep a sense of normality. You know, no matter what our situations are, there'll be some things that we already do which help us to cope and make us feel that, you know, some things can continue as normal, whether that's, you know, going for a walk or preparing meals or whatever that might be. And also, just want to say at this point, there's some really fantastic apps on the market at the moment. Some of them are free, some of them do cost some money, and more resources will be at the end of this slide as well, at the end of the presentation as well. So I think under the title of looking after yourself, when we're feeling stressed and anxious, we tend to use coping strategies to help to get us through. And some of these coping strategies we'll use will be helpful and some will be unhelpful to us and our children. So it might be good to reflect at this point on what your own strategies are when you're put under pressure and stress, and what things have worked well for you already and what things you might be able to think about to put into place right now. And, you know, if you've got somebody you can talk this through with as well, like a partner or a friend, this can be helpful as well. And you can share ideas. So, I mean, just some of the more obvious things about what is helpful, what a lot of people find helpful. Exercise is really important way of sort of coping, relaxation, dealing with excess stress hormones. When there's tensions, you know, it's quite helpful to count to 10, leave the room until you've calmed down a little bit, making time to do things in the day that are important to you or important to your family. We'll talk more later about having routines and timetables. Also, if you find yourself giving way to excessively worrying, it could be that you limit yourself and your worry time to, say, 30 minutes a day. If you find yourself looking at the news excessively, to limit that time. Another obvious way of coping is to speak to a loved one, and you know, that helps you to offload, get perspective, and get some support. Sticking to routine, that can be really helpful in stressful times or times when our normal routines are disruptive, to find a new routine that we can hopefully stick to, and some positive self-talk as well. So and just a few examples. I mean, I'm sure you don't need me to go over all of the unhelpful strategies, but we all have a tendency to do things which are more comforting or avoiding rather than constructive, you know, and it can lead to taking out our frustrations on the nearest and dearest, our families, you know, maybe comfort eating or drinking more than normal, spending too much time watching the news, and, you know, as I said earlier, doing things that are harmful to yourself or your family, taking out your frustrations, and also being hard on yourself. You know, nobody's perfect. You know, so we just all trying to get through these times together, really. So I also wanted to talk at this point about managing relationships. So, you know, it's really, I'm sure you're already experiencing after some weeks in lockdown, this is a time of added stress and anxiety for the whole family. Everybody's with each other sort of 24/7, and it can reduce your patience and tolerance of others' behaviours and habits. It can make your child's demands just seem overwhelming, and also spending so much time with family can really create unhealthy toxic situations, really. So looking at things at an earlier stage rather than waiting until they've got really bad is recommended. So top tips for promoting positive relationships during lockdown. Well, number one is definitely allowing more time for yourself to be alone every day. I think that's vital for mental health, actually, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Just having that time and agreeing with your family what your time is to do whatever you need to do. And also think about what you would like just for you, something that you can do just for you every day. Setting some clear routines for yourself and maybe together with the family, that's definitely helpful. And also setting some clear boundaries around expected behaviour and talking with your family about consequences if rules aren't followed. So I think that's quite important, because maybe pre-lockdown we would have let certain things slide, but somehow they get magnified and sometimes behaviours get worse during stressful times. So I think it's good to revisit as a family what your boundaries are, and very importantly, set some rewards for when the rules and routines are followed. We'll talk a little bit later as well about how we can reinforce positive behaviour in our children. As I've mentioned earlier, counting to 10 and walking away is very important when you feel you're getting frustrated and angry, because when you're angry, then you sort of lose the ability to reason and you move back into that fight and flight mode. So it's important to calm down, to allow the reasoning side of your mind to take over again. And also to take time to listen to each other, and to try and have some empathy for each other as well. And when we think about what's helpful in our behaviours towards other people, I think it's very helpful to try to be patient and avoid criticising excessively, and agree to give each other time and space to calm down when they're finding things difficult. So, I know with myself, I find it helpful to walk away and have some reflective time, some peaceful time if I've had a conflict with somebody in my family, and I see the same thing in them also. My children, they need time to calm down also. I think when things are calm, it's important to have some time with your family to talk about what each other's fears and worries are, but also what their frustrations are, and maybe come to some family agreements about how you're going to negotiate with each other and what things you're going to do that's helpful to other people. So it's about asking people about what their triggers are. You probably quite know what each other's triggers are. I mean, I think children are particularly good at knowing parental triggers and then pressing that button, which they know is going to get a reaction. But I think if you can try to negotiate with children, it depends on their age, of course, and also the adults in the house, to be careful of each other's triggers as well. So I just recommend just trying to maintain as much normality and routine as possible. And lastly, to keep work life as separate as possible. There's a lot of people working at home at the minute, and that's really tough, I think, to keep separate. I know myself, I have a different space where I can close the door at the end of the day and go into a different mode of being. And most of all, you're going to fail at some of these things, obviously. So you've got to try to be forgiving to yourself and to each other, really. The last slide for me to discuss is just to go over some what we call a helpful cycle. So you can see from the diagram that one thing affects another. So, you know, we can start off, for example, in a worry or panic mode. We can have some sort of decided coping strategy to that, which might be to do some exercise, for example, or talk to a family member. And then that creates a feeling of being supported, which then in turn reduces feelings of anxiety. And we learn then that we can cope with anxiety, and that anxiety goes down. So, and whenever that happens, we can repeat that positive cycle. So I've put down a list of other things here you might want to try. So there's some grounding techniques, positive thinking techniques, and also breathing techniques. And you can access a lot of meditations and helpful apps. Being mindful is one. Calm is a very good one. There are many apps, and actually we put some names at the end of this presentation. I'll leave it to Freya to take over.
So now we thought it was quite helpful to also think a bit about supporting learning during lockdown. I think parents have now been put in a position where they're having to be the teachers, which is quite alien to a lot of us. So we thought it might be helpful to think about some strategies to support you in this time. So our top tips really, firstly and most importantly, you aren't a teacher and no one's got any expectations for you to be a teacher. So it's really important to try and not put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect, because that is not helpful for you and your mental health, and it's sort of setting yourself up for a failure. And then also you have lots of your own skills, which you may not realise that can actually be really helpful for learning. So we're going to talk a bit about how to be creative. And as Debbie said, routine. We can't stress enough how helpful that can be, particularly in this time where, you know, there isn't a routine anymore, particularly for your children as well. Being used to having such a rigid school routine, it's so helpful to try and keep some of that consistency, and planning the day, but we'll talk about that a bit more. And using rewards, as Debbie suggested, to try and motivate your children to complete their work can be really helpful, and trying not to battle over work. So I'll talk through them in a bit more detail. Debbie will just click the slide on for me.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. So as I said, you're not a teacher. Try not to put pressure on yourself to be one, and try and celebrate the wins, even if they feel really small. So we kind of recommend maybe set 3 realistic goals a day that are within your comfort zone. So you might have a piece of schoolwork that feels important to complete, and then you might choose an educational documentary and a cooking experiment, for example. So a bit of a mixture of some schoolwork and also educational activities that maybe aren't as difficult for your children to complete. And trying to use some positive self-talk. So I think those negative thoughts can creep in. I'm not a teacher, I'm no good at this, I can't do this. And it's trying to allow that thought to come in, but maybe try and counteract it with something a little bit more positive, such as I can do this, I'm helping my child to learn. It doesn't need to be done in the same way as the teacher. I'm outside of my comfort zone, but I am managing well. And what we know is that the way you think has an impact on the way that you feel. And so it's really important that when you feel those negative thoughts coming in, if you try and have a bit more of a positive spin on it, you will notice that you're feeling a bit calmer, not as worried, and maybe not as low in mood about certain situations. So here's some ideas. So obviously this is for you to be creative yourself, but using your own skills that you already have to support your children with learning. So for example, if you're an avid gardener, you could do some science experiments with your kids, trying to demonstrate how things grow. Or if you're a very creative person, you could think about planning craft activities like sewing, beading, card making, and that kind of thing. If you're sporty, get them out and about doing sports games and practicing those skills. Or if you're a bit of an entertainer, you could be developing shows with your children. They could be writing plays and performing them, or writing ideas for books. And the same, if you're a good cook, you can teach maths through baking. So adding up the different amounts of ingredients and so on. Or if you're really good at computers, you're a computer whiz, you can start teaching them how to be a bit more tech savvy. You know, they could even make a lockdown website that they could share with their friends. And if you're artistic, you know, do some painting and some drawing, you can teach them some strategies, and help them with music if you're really good at music or practicing an instrument. There's so many different ways that children can learn above and beyond the school curriculum. And this is a really nice opportunity for you to share some of your passions with your children, and help them learn in a way that is outside of the curriculum. So now we've stressed it quite a few times, but I think routine really is one of the most helpful ways to keep, I guess, a sense of boundaries. Everybody knows what's expected of them. And it really does help children feel safe if they know what's expected and what's coming. And I think routine also links to setting boundaries and consequences, as Debbie mentioned earlier. But what we really recommend is trying to follow your normal routine as closely as you can to what you did before the lockdown. So, you know, have breakfast in the morning at the same time. You're getting up at the same time, maybe 7:30, having a normal breakfast, having a set lunchtime and a set dinner time, and trying to keep the same sort of healthy diet that you had before, and going to bed at a normal time, trying not to let, you know, bedtime shift later and wake up time shift later. And trying to get the same, you know, time in for study and time in for playing and time in for relaxation. So there's a mixture. And it's quite helpful to sort of set that routine with your child beforehand, because it helps them feel in control of what they're doing. So, for example, if you're trying to plan a timetable with your child, you can give them an opportunity to maybe choose, you know, what they're having for dinner, or they could help with cooking, or cleaning the house. Or you might let them choose, you know, do you want to do your maths homework first, or do you want to do your English homework first? So it's giving them a bit of autonomy over the decisions that they're making, and a bit of power over that, which is good for their mental health as well. So I won't read them all out to you, but yeah, it's just giving them a bit of control. And then I think just generally in supporting your children's mental health is just focusing on the good things as well that are going on. But when we're setting our routine, we want to try and keep the activities quite varied if possible, which will really help maintain the engagement of your children. I think it's very difficult trying to expect your child to start the day at 9 a.m. and finish at 3:30 like they would at school. Because it's important to remember at school, they're doing lots of different things. They're going out into the playground. They're doing lots of variety of activities. They're not just sat at a desk all day. And so, you know, it's important for parents to be able to do the same. So have some time for exercise, then some time for schoolwork, then some craft, and then maybe a bit of cleaning. It's just to keep it kind of varied. And I think that will motivate them to keep doing work longer if you swap in and out of different activities. And then it's also quite important to do things, you know, for your children's well-being that give them a sense of accomplishment. So obviously doing schoolwork can do that, but it won't for all children. So things like helping others, so they might go and help get some shopping for a neighbour, or helping with cleaning the house, or doing some gardening, or they make something. So they get a sense of achievement, because like us, I think it's important to stress this for you as parents as well. When you feel like you've not got much to do and you're not achieving much, that can have quite an impact on your mental health. When you're actually achieving something, you do feel better in yourself. And then also it's really important to have some time to relax, particularly with, you know, we're all a lot more stressed than we would have been outside of lockdown. So particularly before bed, trying to have at least an hour of wind down time where the children can maybe read a book, or listen to some music or something, and having some time in the day really to have a walk and things. And there's just some really nice exercise videos on YouTube, so we just thought it was worth mentioning as well, just to do with that. Now, one of the most helpful things, because I'm sure there's been lots of battles over completing work at home, so it's really difficult for the children. They've been very used to doing it at school. So then home is not a place that they associate with having to do lots of schoolwork in the same way that we're, you know, a lot of us are struggling to do our actual work, because it, you know, it's a place that you tend to relax. So what can really help motivate your children is using rewards. So using a reward after a behavior is going to make that behavior more likely to happen again. So if you tell your child beforehand, you know, if you do the set amount of schoolwork a day, you will get an hour on the Xbox. And then the opposite is also the case. So if there's a consequence after your child does something, so for example, or doesn't do something, so doesn't complete schoolwork, or maybe, you know, gets into a fight with a sibling or something like that, you can have a, you know, clear consequences put in place, like Debbie mentioned. So the sort of agreed family rules, it's really helpful to have clear agreed consequences for what will happen if those rules aren't followed. And it's really important to be consistent with that. So if you said there's going to be a consequence after a behavior, then you need to make sure that that consequence is put in place, or the children will learn that the consequences don't have any meaning. But you will find that once you've used a few, they'll be starting to work quite effectively in teaching the child not to do that behavior again. And then finally, try not to battle over schoolwork. It's not helpful for your mood, the family relationships, to get into argument, particularly over schoolwork. So as I said, set the rules in advance of how much schoolwork needs to be done and what the consequence will be if it's not followed through. And you can just preset that with your children, so it's decided already, and it can be very collaborative, which can be really helpful. And it just can be something logical. So you've not done your schoolwork, so you've got lots of extra time. Brilliant. Okay, you can cook dinner for the family, or you can clean up after dinner, or you can wash the car. So it's kind of a learning opportunity for the child. So as I said, it's helpful if they're logical, and kind of lead on from the negative behaviour that you didn't want to see. And then finally, we just wanted to mention this really helpful resource, which has been developed by the Maudsley. So they've sort of said that they've been hearing that lots of families are struggling at the moment with these restrictions. And this obviously comes as no surprise, because research shows that bored and worried children are more likely to play up and cause more disruption. And frustrated parents can overreact to these challenges. So these behaviours can escalate quite quickly and lead to breakdowns in relationships and exacerbation of problems. So this is where the idea of families under pressures came from, because they were thinking about, one of the researchers was thinking about how his poor old mum would have coped with him during this situation, as he was quite a handful. So he was thinking about what sort of advice she might have found helpful, that other families might find helpful. So you can see we've put the link on there, and you can just type into Google "families under pressure," and it's the Maudsley charity. And there's 8 episodes, which are really brilliant. And they're all narrated by sort of famous people. We've got Olivia Colman, Danny Dyer, Rob Brydon, Holly Willoughby. And they're just talking through 8 top tips for supporting you and your family during coronavirus. So we'd really recommend having a look at that.
And that's really the end of our presentation today. I hope you found something useful within it, and please do go on to the link that Freya has suggested. It's a very good series, very relevant. Just wanted to go over the importance of getting some additional support for yourself, really. So, you know, if you find that you are particularly stressed, worried, low in mood, then please do go and see your GP, who will be able to advise appropriately and assess what might be helpful for you during this time. I think there's a bit of a stigma about mental health, but you know, it's something that most people go through at some point or another, and help is available. Even if GPs are not seen face to face, you can always get phone appointments. Another thing that we would recommend is the Adult IAPT, Psychological Therapist Service, and this is a self-referral service. There's, you know, there are other help available, which is listed here, and lots and lots of very good apps are available also for some low-level support. So can strongly recommends that. I've got some other numbers here for you as well, but we'll leave you with the numbers to take down whatever you might find helpful. That's everything.
Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, yeah.